This is the Mind Body Detox podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom for how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back, everyone, to the Mind Body Detox podcast. I'm your host, Mind Body Medium Karen Lovehart, and today we have Miss Allie Kochert back with us again. So if you have not listened to the past episodes, we will reference them. So Allie Kochert is an integrative therapist, a spiritual director, and a psychospiritual consultant. So the last episodes we did with her were working with healing trauma and burnout, and then we were talking about spiritually safe spaces. So we talked about those, and this particular episode, we're going to be going into the topic of burnout. So integrative approaches specifically and holistic approaches to burnout recovery. So let's bring Miss Allie back on the show.
Hey, Kara. Nice to see you again. Hi, everyone.
So you've been busy since we last connected. You've created some really cool retreats and some offerings you're doing. So I know we're going to talk about those today, but I guess before we dive into that, if anyone has not listened to our past episodes we've done together, it would be really beautiful if we could share what you do as far as working with trauma-informed services. You're trauma-informed in your care and your practices. You're an educator in that way. And there's a lot of chronic stress and burnout in our culture. So it would be really great for us to define that and what that actually is.
Sure. Yeah. Well, trauma-informed care is sort of the crux of therapy in the therapy world. Many of us have heard that term, even if you're not in therapy, is being thrown around. But I think being trauma-informed is essential in any caregiving profession. So as an integrative therapist, I'm trained in trauma care. I utilize holistic practices, but as well as internal family systems and somatic experiencing, and lots of different trainings that come in to help me with orient myself to a healing embodied experience with clients. But in general, trauma is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. We've all experienced it on some level, big T and small t. There's lots of different definitions of what trauma is. We go into that a lot in those previous podcasts, but in general, it's an experience that gets us to a place of a felt sense of a lack of safety and security, where we have a risk to bodily harm, psychological harm, emotional harm. So those can be collective trauma that can be experienced in a collective, in a group. It can experience one-on-one. It can be a one-time thing. It can be over time, over childhood, for instance. When it comes to complex trauma, it tends to be childhood trauma. So trauma's, one of those things that that needs to be assessed with a caregiver, as well as something that you claim as your own, that we get to have the agency to say whether or not we feel like our boundaries have been violated and we've been harmed. So and then burnout, is almost like a Venn diagram, in that there's an overlap between trauma and burnout. Not everyone with burnout has had trauma in the way that maybe they would describe, but a lot of people do. And a type of trauma that has often come up in burnout is vicarious trauma. So secondary trauma is another term. So it's the idea that when we work with people who have been through very difficult or painful experiences, traumatic loss, really major grief processes, if we work with people who have been harmed and we hear those stories, then we can carry the traumatic, experience with us, especially those of us who are sensitives and empaths and caregivers, that we can carry the trauma And so that's a protective response. It's something that we as humans, because we live interdependently and interconnectively, that's a protective response that we share the burden together. But we have to realize that that can actually be harmful if we don't know how to process the trauma, or we don't have help doing so.
Yeah, I think I'm wondering if you've had experienced trauma, which causes a lot of just already wear and tear on the nervous system. If burnout is something that's more likely or easier experienced from the perspective of someone's nervous system who's already challenged with trying to find regulation. Do you have any understanding of that, or is that connection there?
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the terms like you hear in the sort of trauma informed world is zone of tolerance. So if you're outside of that zone of tolerance, if your nervous system is outside a window of the ability to cope, therefore you'll be much more activated outside of that window. So if you're living your life with a very narrow window of tolerance, you're much more easily quote unquote triggered, the old school word for activated. And therefore, if you're highly activated, you have much higher risk of chronic stress and major stress on the nervous system, and actually more potentially higher incidence of trauma or feeling traumatized.
Yeah. I wanted to share briefly one of the things that I find really interesting about this whole topic is I have an innate drive to continue to really expand my consciousness and help others along the way. And because of that drive, I have recognized through my own journey, through not only business trauma, that's a part of a type of trauma, but then burnout along the way, but also being neurodivergent. Like I have like the trifecta of all the things that my nervous system had a potential for going through it, but then now having this resiliency that I can cultivate within myself. So on one hand, it was like a really challenging learning experience, and it always is still continuing to learn and grow. But I feel very grateful for you as a resource and all the things I continue to learn. I must feel like if I can go through that with the nervous system that I have, as a highly sensitive person and as a medium, I'm more sensitive to extra stimuli. Having that ability, I feel so grateful because I not only know what other people have gone through and how challenging it can be, and even if you are neurodivergent or on the spectrum or have already you're outside the window of tolerance, right? You're more sensitive. It's even more challenging. But I have so much compassion for that process because I've gone through it. And so even more passion for what you're doing, for what you're offering. And of course, we just did another podcast for burnout retreats and care. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the term for burnout, like why it's common today, and what you're offering right now. You're really moving into this space for this soul care and as far as a retreat type of package. So yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, why? Well, I think burnout's always been around. I think we haven't had a term for it in a way that resonates with folks. And also, there's just an increased awareness of systemic and collective distress. I think, especially, it may be because I'm not really sure, but because of social media and the interconnected nature of people talking about their lives in a different way than back in the day. There's so many reasons why burnout is more ubiquitous now than it was even 10 to 15, 20, 30 years ago. But, and I share the story in the previous podcast, like I come from a family of healers and helpers, generationally. And, burnout has always been there. Yeah. It just hasn't been in a way that is we orient ourselves in a way that we do in a modern sense. The problem with the way burnout's talked about these days is that it's an individual problem that we have to recover from and deal with. Whereas in my experience in working as a burnout therapist, this is a systemic problem. Burnout's a systemic problem that we fall underneath. Doesn't mean that we can't do anything over the fact that we have broken healthcare systems or broken educational systems. I work with mostly healers, helpers, and teachers, educators. We can't prevent the way the structures are broken. We can cope with the situation perhaps maybe even a little differently, as well as advocating for change, which is that second part, I think is absolutely essential and should be core. If you are burned out and you are seeking treatment, it should be core to your treatment, is understanding the model around you of resourcing. So I always ask folks when they come in, where are you lacking resourcing? Where is your safety and security? That's number one before we even talk about self-care or relaxation response or even assessing trauma. It doesn't even matter if we don't feel like we are getting our needs met, safety and security.
And that's really hard. That's really hard in the world because, with the changes in family structures, it could, someone could move, they could have a change in their economic status. Like there's a lot of things that are really connected to our safety, or that we've tied, other people, we've tied ourselves, not necessarily interdependently in a healthy way, but even codependently, where our safety can be threatened at any time. And that psychological safety even. I think that's the biggest word that I've been contemplating that's happening in the world today, this sense of uncertainty. That word uncertainty, and how do we find a sense of security within that sense of uncertainty? Through my spiritual practice, and I'm sure some of the soul care offerings you're going to share today. But that's one of the biggest challenges I think we all have. Yeah.
Well, I think I would ask then, if someone would come to me and ask, I say they're uncertain, like, where is that voice coming from?
Yeah.
Is that your voice?
Collectively.
Sometimes, we're fed a line that things should be different. Things should be this way, that way. And it's not. When we start stepping back, we're like, wait, it looks a little differently when we start looking objectively at our lives about what we can control and like what are the things that we can do, or the way, if we can't advocate for change, who can advocate for us, and how can we harness a collective or interdependence in a way that's really essential for any kind of recovery.
Yeah. I know that what we're moving into, we're going to talk about your retreat spaces, and I know that relates to people, but I just had a thought. One of the things we're going to be talking about coming up on the podcast for the themes is community and connection and creating safe spaces and community. And I think about the interconnection, that word interconnection, and how our culture, I don't know if it truly understands anymore. We talked about this in the past, with not having congregations or churches or spaces in which people gather and feel that sense of security from more of like a primal communal tribal state. We just don't have that. And I'm thinking about this, one of the things that has been the challenge when I said about the word uncertainty is a thing I see so much. And my journey recently has been being that kind of solid reminder for other people. It's going to be okay, and watching kind of, I feel like I have the eye of the storm and watching the hurricane all around me, kind of seeing it in the world of this fear, this uncertainty that people are experiencing, and seeing that it's very clear sometimes that there are resources, but not everyone, when you're in that state, you can't see, So I think that self-awareness is, like so crucial to the steps you're asking, like before you even go into talking about trauma or talking about self-care. Like, I think that's very amazing that you're doing that, and good to share with everyone that's listening too, in case they're working with someone. I think it's just, like you said, foundational. So.
Yeah, I appreciate you in like providing a holistic framework or a holistic trauma informed framework in the work that you do. I think that's more than necessary. That's awesome. Yeah. But yeah, when you were asking about retreats, like, so what I've noticed through the years is that when folks come to therapy for trauma or therapy for burnout, one of the biggest themes is disconnection. So disconnection from self, disconnection from others, disconnection from the culture, from your collective, like you said, like your tribe or your a group.
Yeah.
I mean, it can look like the sort of the crisis of loneliness here in the States. But in general, like people just say, like, I feel really disconnected. And the work that I do is inner compass work. It's reorienting ourselves to our own understanding of connection and then connectivity. And that always means understanding, like with the root grow thrive model, rooting into who are we connected to? What are the resources and people around us who are part of our story that looks like ancestors too, um, and chosen family in the modern world. And so it's both, and it's both holding that posture of understanding that we are indeed connected, and how do we move through that. So folks often in burnout like say that, okay, I want to not be burned out, I want to not feel so exhausted, I want to feel like I have meaning and purpose. A lot of that really, I love the word used, foundational, like the understanding the foundation to reorient yourself to your core purpose. And that takes a lot of sitting with. And like if we have been either traumatized or under chronic stress, sitting with does not come easy, and it actually can be very harmful. And so we have to have safe trauma informed spaces, like with therapy, like with therapeutic retreats, like with you guys and your holistic offerings. Where can we center in on a space of openness so that we can start to orient ourselves to our inner knowing and our inner meaning and purpose. And when we're oriented with that, we're much more able to see where we're naturally connected. It's just we're not seeing it. We're feeling disconnected, but that is not true. Because we're human living in human skin. We all have connections. So the therapeutic retreats that I've offer, and we can go into those, but they really are part and parcel of that model of reclaiming yourself with a capital S.
And so when you're having these retreats, especially because you're going to be working in a holistic, integrative way, what are some of the ways you work in the retreat space with burnout, and maybe some of the mind body connections, and just some of the things that you're noticing as you work in the tools that you use?
Yeah. Well, intensives is a newer model of care in the therapy world. Though they've been used through the years, it's becoming to be more popular. So the difference between intensives and individual therapy. So people in individual therapy would come to a therapist maybe on a weekly basis, and maybe for an hour at a time, and like talk about what's going on and do model of therapy that the therapist is trained in. Over a span of time. Retreat intensives, or at least intensives, are an accelerated, condensed model of that into a short amount of time. And so they usually last between 2 to 4 days and multiple hours per day. So that's why it's called an intensive, because it's a condensed, accelerated model. And the kind of intensives that I offer, because they're not related to, or I don't take insurance, so it's not a medical model, it's a retreat based model. So for folks that come to me in burnout and trauma, in overwhelm, just want to reconnect to themselves, they're almost always caregiving professionals or therapists, parents, that kind of thing, and they need a break. So, I mean, I get that. I mean, I'm a mom myself. I'm a therapist. I've been through burnout myself. I know the importance of that. So this is a curated and condensed model of care that's a one-on-one basis. It's actually online for people in PA, because I'm licensed in PA. So we would have over several days a deep dive into your intention. And so we do an intention setting session, We do the intensive, and then we have a intensive session. And during that, both of those 2 sessions to start and end, it's really, those are capstones to create a real nice container for folks to initiate their healing process.
And then as far as the groups go, are they also available in person or are they only online?
So these are one-on-one, and retreat intensives are one-on-one, and they are absolutely curated and collaborative for each person. They're totally online. So by and large, the clients that I see for retreat intensives, they are motivated to spend the time, like to take the time off during their weekday or weekend, and often take like an Airbnb or some kind of space to get away so that they have a space to do their work outside of their home. In part because most of the folks that I see are caregivers as well as home, and needing to get out of their own home is part of the work, and part of the need for a container. So it is online, and it doesn't mean that we're sitting doing therapy like one-on-one with your face in a screen the whole time. The kind of therapy I do, we get up, we have creative practice almost throughout the entire time. We turn off our screens, we go outside. It's a very facilitated model for movement and embodied experience. So, and every therapist has their own model. I'm just describing the ones that I do, but there's lots of therapists out there that do intensives, and they're all curated. They tend to be very curated to the experience of what your needs are.
That's awesome. And especially if you've been burned out, the last thing you really want to do is go somewhere, travel on an airplane or long, sometimes you just want to be in hermit mode by yourself, not with a lot of other people in a space where it's a group. Because I know that is also an option for people. Sometimes people have been so disconnected, and that connection, I think, sometimes is what helps people come back online and get that sense of purpose, and connecting through other people's stories and seeing that they're not alone too. So I love that you have this really beautiful option for people. Now, I know that we haven't even done a lot of any more episodes like about you and some of the other offerings you offer integratively, as far as spiritually as well. I'd love to learn more about how you incorporate some of these modalities that you offer, because you are a dream work therapist and you practice astrology and tarot. And I'd love to see how those, when they're appropriate for a client, of course, when they give permission, consent, and that they're really into that, what is the process for that? And how does that work with your approach?
Yeah, that's what's like so great especially about the intensives, is that they give, because they're a container, we can really do deep dives into models of care that are just innovative and really exploratory, in a way that maybe weekly therapy you just don't get to sometimes, with just like coming up with what's going on in your life, right? It's very an intentional container, right? So yeah, I am trained as a spiritual director in the Jungian mystical tradition, from the Hayden Institute. So I have dream work experience going back to when I was actually a teen. I'm doing dream work since then, and I have at least 10 years experience working the tarot, as well as about 5 years diving into natal astrology. And mostly because, I just find all of that to be such language of the soul. In general, the kind of orientation that I have in my therapy, it's soul care. It's not just psychological care. It's not just checking off a box of like, how can I stress less? Yeah, we do that, but we also, care for the soul. And so folks, when they are, tarot readers themselves, or when they have creative outlets, or they're creatives, or they crave sort of a spiritual lens on their life, which most of us do when we're looking at meaning and purpose. Most of us do really want something wider than just the everyday. Then I'm like a polyglot when it comes to this stuff. I can talk about it. And I can assist folks in using it the way that would help them. So the way that I orient myself towards, for instance, tarot in integrative retreats would be if they want to use it and they're really creative or they're really curious about it, I use it as like a projective model of introspection. So to use it similar to art therapy or other creative models of projection that help us see our sides outside ourselves. Most of us have experience of like seeing an art, a piece of art and just really like feeling a tremendous amount of feelings with it. There's something about this piece of art that just draws me in. And so that's similar to what we do when it comes to using tarot, except we use archetypal imagery. We use collective kind of, imagery that resonates not just with one person. It's not just your story, it's our story. And so we do that. And then dream work is similar to that as well. When people are coming in with dreams, it's intensely sacred. Dreams are just beautifully sacred. And so we're held in a model of what this means for the client, not me judging what their words are, even guiding them to say, like, this is what it means, but rather knowing the bigger story, understanding where they're coming from with their own, either their challenges or their intention for healing. And then how can this dream be part of that story to initiate yourself closer to your meaning and purpose or your center, if that makes sense.
I think that the fact that you are using these things, I think that the desire to know the self in a deeper way is what drives the opening in the doorway for expansion into utilizing these modalities. And I think that, in my opinion, I can understand for years as I've learned astrology and tarot and dream work and many different modalities for exploring the self. I was so confused as for years and years of therapy that I went through. I was like, why did they never ask me about my dreams? Why did we never talk about them? Why did we never explore through meditation or, this internal sense, the felt sense, the awareness? It was more just, let's just regurgitate and chat and hamster wheel on what was the biggest stress. And I understand there's different types of therapy and different ways that you're working with either behaviorally or cognitively or whatever, but it just wasn't the right care for me because I've always been that deep person. Like, I want to know. I picked up my first astrology book when I was 14 and I was like, let's do this, So I'm when I first met you, I've said this in the last episode or the one before, I was just so excited to meet someone in the licensed psychotherapy world that is embracing these tools, because it never made sense to me why they're not integrated when they're appropriate, of course. So
yeah, when they're appropriate. I am extremely privileged to be outside of a medical model here, yet also within it. So the fact that I'm a licensed therapist, yes, I have to hold myself accountable to an ethical code, and that everything that I do with therapy, clients especially, is guiding them towards an intention and a goal, right, of healing. I would be not treating someone otherwise. I couldn't be calling myself a licensed therapist otherwise. But like within that model, we can really hold innovation as opportunity for and curiosity. And like those are the things that get thrown out like baby with the bathwater with narrow mindset, but also fear-based mindset of healing that is part and parcel to the reason why my clients are burned out, especially those in healthcare.
Yeah.
If you're coming from a model of fear, then you're like, everything's going to narrow, and it's not necessarily going to be in service for your healing and your wholeness.
Yeah.
And opportunity there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for those of us who have never had maybe an astrology or a tarot reading or even done any dream work or had anything like that, is there any practical examples, whether anecdotal or examples you could come up with, that we would see an example of me telling you, like I'd tell you my dream, and like what would that look like as far as maybe the process of the dream, maybe what is an example of a dream that someone could have, and then the process of working through that dream with you. And I'd love to do that if possible for either the dream work, the tarot, or astrology, or all like some practical examples of what that looks like.
Yeah, like it depends on what the hat that I'm wearing at the time.
Right.
Because like if I'm a therapist at the time, generally you have a relationship with me that it becomes organic, and they know that they can bring dreams in at any time. So if they're bringing a dream in, then it's like, stop the tracks. This is like, it's a sacred moment. Anytime anyone ever brings dreams into session, I think we just minimize that. I'm not sure why culturally, but the fact that people willing to share their liminal space and their liminal knowledge that's highly connected to soul, it's a sacred moment that I get to witness. And so I just mirror that back to folks, that you're willing to do this vulnerable work. So be able so in a therapeutic mindset, we acknowledge the vulnerability of what it means to process dreams. And then the fact that I already know some of their story and what they're working on, quote unquote, working on, then we can both explore, the archetypal meanings of symbolism in the dream, as well as and me mirroring back what I'm seeing in the client as to what is resonating the most in those images, as to what exactly the dream could be inviting further openness towards. Dreams always come in the service of health and wholeness.
Yes.
Always. Even the horrible ones, even the nightmares. People don't believe that, but I promise you, yes. Always. So dream work is really about health and wholeness, and really about vulnerability and opening up to that. So in the therapeutic model, it's towards those health and wholeness, quote unquote, goals or intentions that we're working on. But I also offer, as a spiritual director, dream work sessions.
Yes.
And it's a little bit of a different model in that people come, they know they're coming with a dream, and then we're going to process it together. And I'm going to just offer projections of my own onto the dream. If this were my dream, yeah. That's how I work with it. So I really orient myself to understanding, like, it's not my dream, but it is too.
Yeah.
So the Jungian model of collective unconscious, Google it if you're not aware of it. It's really fantastic. But the whole idea that all dreams are all of ours feels like but it's true, and working. So like if people are sharing their dream and I get to project onto it, it can really give them an aha. It's like, oh, I didn't see it that way.
Yeah.
I didn't see it that way. And so usually by the end of those spiritual direction / soul care dream work sessions, they're not therapy. It's separate. People go away with wheels turning. And I almost always offer them the suggestion to ask dream wisdom to give them another dream.
Yeah.
To offer another dream after we're done processing, in order to keep the creative ahas alive, so that it will keep moving in the direction of understanding what these images really mean for you and me.
Yeah. One of the dreams that I process through, and I'll share through my burnout, one of my reoccurring dreams in my journey is being at water parks and being with water in a fun way. So water to me represents emotion. I love deep emotion. I love art. I love music. I love song. It's like a deep part of who I am. And during the process of my burnout and having to handle the role of multiple admin positions, I had to shut down a lot of my emotional response. You can't really, even though you get it, you have to just up, you got to do black and white. You got to keep going because there's a lot of things to do and you can't get lost in the emotion because you won't be productive and then you'll get farther behind. So what's really interesting is I started having my dreams come back online and started having dreams about water parks again. It was a good sign for me. Yeah, it was like I'm having water dreams again. I'm in Hawaii on the waves, and I'm like it's always these like beautiful spaces, and my emotions turn back online a lot. This was a lot of doing Kundalini practice too, for and a lot of body work to release that nervous system response, so I could get into that emotional space. But I feel like if I was working with you and you knew my backstory, like that processing will be even deeper because you have so many reflection points. So I just wanted to give that as an example to anyone out there that's never had any sort of dream or even looked at dream dictionaries for themselves. But that's just for me, and that's been a reoccurring dream my entire life. I love water parks, not really in the physical world, but just in my dreams. Like I love to play in emotion and experience deep emotion. So yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the tarot has been really paramount too. Or the what's really interesting is during the burnout process of okay, we don't have these administration positions, Kara has to do them. No matter what I did, I would shuffle the cards and I would pull the Emperor card and the fours, always the fours. And so, and my office manager, Emily, at the time, she kept starting to see the fours too. Like we just see repeating numbers, fours all the time, 444. And to me, I said to her, it is a reminder to my soul that you just need to keep going with the structure and continue to create the stability. Because, for those of you, four to me is a stable number. It's, a table has four legs. It's the secure structure that we were looking to build because there was so much over COVID, and every organization and the world has the stability was taken out. The carpet was swept out from underneath people. So that was the theme from the tarot. And we would laugh every time I do a tarot, just a card pull. Oh, there's the Emperor again, card number 4, And so it was beautiful when I started to see other things start to change in that pattern for myself. And that the 4 started to subside and say, it feels everything's been anchored and structured now. So yeah. Yeah. So that was just my sharing. I don't know if you have any stories or things you'd like to share as far as the tarot and examples at all. I just wanted to share that one.
Well, just to riff on what you just said was, the emperor of self and other leadership is like inner leadership versus outer leadership, and like that dichotomy of understanding foundation requires self-knowledge. It requires us to have our feet on the floor. But it also requires us to be in community about what that means. And so to give of stable leader, like to create stable leadership, like in what you've done post burnout, like that's fantastic. If the tarot is like somewhere else and saying all the 5s, for instance, or all the 7s, or like it just would be a different type of energy that it would be, reflecting back maybe chaos or maybe uncertainty, or whether or not a fight is worth it.
Yes.
Whereas something like that really was, I imagine, quite grounding and reassuring,
Yeah.
which is so beautiful. And that's how I would work, regardless if it's therapy or spiritual direction with someone with tarot. It's really about what it means for you,
Mm-hmm.
and like what do you see?
Mm-hmm.
If someone's pulling a card, often they have their own cards. I initiate, do you want to pull a card? Sure. Okay. So then we riff back and forth as to like what that, similar to dream work, like what could that mean for you and your story? How does this fit in? And what's cool about the tarot, for those of you who are unfamiliar, it tells a story from 0 or 1 to, 0 for the major arcana, 0, all the way up. So there's an arc to the story, and similar to, the minor arcana too. There's already an arc of storytelling that you can insert yourself into the story of the tarot as to like, oh, where am I at on my journey? How can I reflect back what this means for me? And what is this for me and my wholeness reflected to me?
Yeah.
So it's really a projective tool, for active imagination, to use a Jungian word or term. It's really an active imagination. It's active. It's processing. It's really about, it's not about reading the future or certainly not about me as a provider to project my stuff. It's more, what can we learn from your projections onto the image or your projections onto your.
Yeah. I'm glad you clarified that too, because if someone is working through feelings of powerlessness or feeling like they're trying to find that sense of security, that sense of safety to resource themselves, as you said before, I think that with people, that's why I love that you're doing this and integrating these types of tools, because a lot of times as practitioners, as a reader myself, and even our readers at Firefly, we have training now to be trauma informed and make sure that we can in a graceful way refer people if we need to, because if someone's going through a lot of uncertainty, there is this desire to want to know the future, what's going to happen. And we're not fortune tellers. We don't do that. We're very specific. And even Pat, our reader, talks about that and even teaches that in her courses for tarot. But I think too often that has been a tool that has been used in a space that it absolutely, there is predictive astrology, there's predictive tarot, there's predictive arts. But at the same time, as a reader myself, they're always just reflections of what the current space is, the current, where you're at now. If you're continuing your trajectory, this is the probable outcome. If you shift who you are, where you're at, where your mindset is, then that completely different card pool, completely different projection. But I think it's really important if you're working with these tools, even for the first time, and you know yourself to be like, well, what if I, might want to just have some sort of sense of certainty that it's going to be this way, that Allie's saying that she's using it in a specifically a reflective tool for getting deeper into the answers within yourself. And I think my opinion is that's what these art forms are to do anyway, that all of these tools holistically, if you integrate them all together, everything we've talked about in the show, everything in Get, all of it is about expanding your consciousness and that self-awareness, because that's where you find that sense of that's where power is anyway. If you're seeking that sense of self-assuredness and who you are and your path and journey. So, but astrology, is there anything as far as an example or practical application as far as how you've used that we could also share that one too?
I love working natal astrology with folks. I do a lot. So as a spiritual director, not as a therapist. So I often work with folks on their natal charts with them if they are open to it as a tool, again, for self-reflection as to where their spiritual journey is and where they're kind of at, where their feet are at, where they feel invited to, and possibly even work transits as to what's potentially energetically happening. So folks really enjoy that as, I don't know, just as a fun, expansive way of understanding the cosmos, right? And how we are just pieces of it in energetic ways. And it's just a great way of doing spiritual care. And, I can orient, similar to tarot, similar to dream work, to use in therapy astrology concepts as archetypal, as sort of the Jungian idea of reflections of the unconscious that are embodied in our experience. So I'm really sensitive to using, whether or not I'm not an astrologer, I wouldn't term myself as that. So I don't necessarily use them in therapy in the way that it would be like what a traditional model of astrology would be, but rather if it's already a language that person is using, then I'm able to use that language back. And so that's partly actually that's fully why I started studying astrology, is because I started working in soul care. I opened my own practice as a spiritual director, and I started seeing folks who had the language of astrology were talking about moon moon phases, or we're even talking about, Venus wisdom or whatever it was. And I was like, I need to know what they're talking about. Less so for me, but rather like, I just want to meet them where they're at.
Yes.
And so since then, I've loved that this as just a collaborative effort of introspection. But the biggest thing that I get out of, that I see clients get out of astrology work, is self-compassion.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful tool to use for understanding that what's without is within, and what's within is without, that we are never not connected, and that we can orient ourselves to that grounded understanding of soul as part and parcel of something bigger. And like what that is, obviously, is as independent as each person. Like every person gets to define that is. It's trauma-informed care. You get to decide what that is. But that is what's taken away when we are traumatized, is agency, autonomy, understanding we're connected. That's what's taken away.
Yeah.
So part of these tools is really to reclaim that, we are part and parcel of this bigger picture. What does that mean for you? How can we continue to develop that? And not a spiritual bypassing way, but a rooting way.
Yeah. I love the aspect of understanding the language of astrology. Obviously, I get readings for my business on a yearly basis, but when I dived into it, 14 was my first book, and then I was hooked. And just when I first met another person that could speak that language, it was just like diving in like a big nerd. Like, we're going to go and talk about our space and our Venus and our Mars, how we communicate, our Mercury. And I just felt like this language is so full, especially if you are into the psyche or the soul or how that works. And I think for an example from my own journey, having multiple astrologers that I work around, that they are astrologers, that I could look at my own transits and look at things happening and say, I've been noticing this and I'm feeling this, and this is what's happening with my planets. Like, oh, that makes so much sense. And I'm like, isn't that interesting? And it gives me not only awareness to have more self-awareness around a potential circumstance, a life change or shift or transition or opportunity, right? There's an opportunity here. I think that awareness of the language and what it looks like, and my own self-knowledge and awareness of who I am, where I'm at, it gives me more bandwidth to see how it could show up realistically, and then go, that's what it looks like right now. That's what it looks like. And I like the ability to have that. I am an Aries, so I like challenge. Challenge is my motivation. So if you know what your motivation is, or you know what your client's motivations are by looking at their natal chart, like, that's powerful, because then you can support them in, what it drives them. What is the thing they can look at their transits, or look at these archetypal symbols that are happening in their life, or that's their birth chart, so they can understand themselves and feel that sense of, that you said, sense of purpose and sense of I like the word acceptance of the self, because when you can see yourself from this, wow, this is affirming, this is who I am, I'm made this way, and there's nothing wrong with it. This gives me the opportunity in this area to be skillful with it, in this area to not be skillful with it. And I went through a transit, Pluto moon conjunction, which is one that's very uncommon to happen in people's lifetimes. And during that transit, guess what my astrologer said? You need to go see your counselor right now. You need to go even more so, because the moon sign is your unconscious. It's the depth of your intuition, these unseen things. And Pluto, the planet of rebirth, destruction, transformation, was going past this deep part of myself that was my inner childhood wounds, things that I'm like, I've done a lot of work in years. And I thought, when that came up, I was like, well, I've already done it. I continue to do work. And I was like, when it started hitting, I was like, oh yeah, she's right. Yeah. Oh, wow. And it's so cool to have the awareness, like, this is a transit. This is something that's like symbolically already here. It says it in the stars. And that made me feel supported by a higher power. It made me feel supported that this is an opportunity to transform. And I have the self-awareness to do it with help. and it's lasting for this period of time, which was really cool for me too, that because you always think it's not going to end. You're like, yeah, this too shall pass. So I feel like that really changed my journey, especially it was at the peak of my burnout. So thank God for astrology.
Yeah, and I love that you said about just self-acceptance, but also understanding just a wider viewpoint on um, what the word that came to mind is invitation. Like, how am I invited into this concept? And that's really what creative practice is always about. Like, how am I invited in? Not someone else telling me what to do, or someone else directing
Mhm.
me, but rather like with my own agency, with connecting to my own inner wisdom that's been so just railroaded by my caregiving role, by my multiple roles, by my burnout, by so much. How can I orient myself to what I feel invited to do?
Yeah.
And yeah, it can be really fruitful.
Yeah, I love that key component, and so for listeners who maybe are like really resonating with this, they are really curious about maybe retreat intensives or maybe just doing some Jungian dream work with you or any other of the services you're offering. Um, could you tell us a little bit more about that process and what it looks like to get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, so I have free consultations. You just go on my website, rootgrowththrive.com, and click free consultation. You can schedule right away. For therapy, I see folks in Pennsylvania. I'm also out of state provider from Florida as well, but I see folks online for therapy. And we can assess in that 20-minute session, like what my services are best used for, if I could be of service to you. If not, like, I have great referrals, I'm here for providing like resources. So we can talk about like, oh, well, I may not be the best for you, but this person could be, etc. But yeah, that's basically it. I mean, if you are someone who's curious about retreat intensives, I have a special 30-minute retreat intensive consult on my Calendly links in my bio. We can link that, but we can, and then we talk about like, if you have an intention, if you have something you want to quote unquote get over, I have this thing, like I have this or that, or, or just feel off, or they didn't even need intention. But usually folks who come into intensives are like, they have something that's been picking at them that they're like, I'm ready to just let this go or move past. Some people, actually, about 50% of the folks that I see for retreat intensives or in therapeutic intensives, I'll have their own therapist. So we get to talk about whether or not I'd be in collaboration with their current therapist or not, and what that would look like for them, to make sure that they feel like they're onboarded and then offboarded with me, in a way that feels really right for them. So it's really easy to get in touch with me. I mean, I'm an email away. And I do dream work and soul care. You can read about all that on my website for people worldwide. So it's a non-therapy container, but it's spiritual direction. You can read about all that online.
Yeah. Well, before I go into my final question, do you have anything else about our topic today for the integrative approaches for recovery and the intensives that you want to talk about or share?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think in general, like, people know when they're ready for lack of a better word, healing. I mean, I think I was like iffy feeling sometimes about the word healing, because I have an orientation that we're all whole, but this whole idea of like, I think we all know when we're ready to orient ourselves back to ourselves, and we have that little whisper that either something's not right, or that now is the time, or maybe just taking one tiny step to find the resource that's right for you. I think listen to that. listen to that intuition. It's there for a reason, and it's always been there. It's just, I would say, listen to your intuition.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, the final question I really have is for listeners that maybe you're feeling overwhelmed or burned out, are there any first steps that you always recommend to start their healing journey, just to get started?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just loop around to what we were saying in the beginning, assessing your safety and security. Like, where do you feel connected? If you can, identify where your resources are currently. If there's one person who can be your advocate, who can be there for you, that would be on your side, who is that? And to use those resources, lean into them. And if you're finding a lot of red flags when you're sort of looking at your situation, to know that you're not alone. Like, there's so many resources out there for all types of people in all walks of life. And accessing them is just, it's one step towards feeling better. So, oftentimes when people come to me for consults, it's heartbreaking how long people wait. They just feel like they wait and they wait and they wait. It's like years. I mean, there's something like researchers says like 10 years till someone finally gets to therapy, something like that. But regardless, it's just, no one deserves to suffer. So, and no one deserves to struggle alone. It's not what they were meant to do. So, yeah. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that is absolutely perfect. But I hope you guys really liked this episode. I thank you so much for coming on again. I always want to talk longer with you. We have always so much we could talk about. Yeah. But if you guys do have a specific topic, actually, that you want us to go and talk with Allie in at length, please let us know. Actually, please do, because there's so much more. We could even go into a whole episode on Jungian dream work, I'm sure. So yeah, for sure. But other than that, thanks for being here, Miss Allie. And we will see you guys later. Thank you guys for tuning in, and be well till next time, my friends. Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Detox podcast. If you love this podcast, share it with others and leave us a review. Your reviews help us more than you know and supports us continuing to make episodes and being heard from all over the world. You can also follow the link in our show notes to submit a topic that you would like to hear on the show.